All right, welcome to the Neutralize podcast, which is dedicated to engineering experience and biohacking, which is essentially the same thing, for cognitive performance and happiness. And cognitive performance is something that I think that many people today underestimate the potential of. People don't see the potential of themselves. People don't see how much they can do. People underestimate their ability, their potential ability to recall memories. How much of a photographic memory is possible. How much of verbal fluency, which I'm clearly not on top of my game on today, can be improved upon. All of these cognitive functions can be improved upon. And that is what Neutralize is all about. We want to do it through living a happy life as well. We don't want to disregard well-being just to get the maximal amount of cognitive performance. We won't want to get into anxious state of mind just because that may increase the frequency of thoughts and the speed of processing, because it's not a sustainable way of living. So Neutralize is dedicated to, through biohacking, through experience engineering, raising well-being and cognitive performance baseline in people who want to join in on the journey. So this podcast will contain a lot of different sorts of episodes. Today we will be essentially reading an article, and I won't be covering what other sorts of episodes will be on the podcast. You'll have to wait and see for that. But today we'll be reading an article which has been posted on the medium.com account of my name, David Rundid, and also at neutralize.com. So that's the home of the blog and the podcast. And the name of this article, this blog post, is The Best Nootropics for De-stressing and Relaxing, backed by my experience and science. And so I won't be reading it literally as I've written it. Instead, I'll try to slightly alter what I've written so that it will help you as a listener more, and so that it will help you understand how you can act in your life to improve your happiness and cognitive performance from now on. So to start this article off on how you can use nootropics for de-stressing and relaxation, I think that you should really try to get your sleep, exercise, nutrition, and mindfulness right before you start experimenting with nootropics. Because they are so much more important. They are incredibly many more times. They are going to yield incredibly many more multiples of results than are nootropics. If you compare the two, so the group of interventions in your life of improving your sleep, exercise, nutrition, and mindfulness against just using nootropics, then the first group of interventions, which is not nootropics, which is the sleep, exercise, nutrition, and mindfulness one, that one will yield extremely much better results. So I want you to get that right before you start experimenting with nootropics. And on top of that, I think that cognitive behavioral therapy and conscious breathing are two other methods that should probably be used before you start experimenting with nootropics as well. And to move on to the science of why we want to reduce the stress, I'll quickly just round up the research. And the research says that stress in itself is not bad for you, but stress without rest is. And here I'm coming across a scientific study that I've linked to, which I referenced in this article. And regarding how I am going to reference scientific studies in the podcast, I will not be including references to the studies in the description of the podcast. I'll instead be letting you go into the article and find the hyperlink, which is the underlined portion of the sentence, which the statement which has a corresponding study, that study will be found in the hyperlink of that statement. So, for this first statement with a hyperlink in this blog post, we have the statement that several cognitive functions, such as memory and focus, can be negatively impacted by chronic stress. And that is something that I think we all can agree is true. We can all attest to the fact that chronic stress is not good for us. It's quite obvious, but I want to just get slightly deeper into it so that we can define stress, so we're talking about the same thing. And I define stress as nervous system activation. And nervous system activation is, of course, imperative for our cognitive performance. We don't want to have no nervous system activation, because then we're just dead, essentially. So we need nervous system activation, but we don't want to get too much of it without any stress, or rather without any rest following it. Because that can lead to several negative biochemical implications. And these biochemical changes in turn in your body and brain will alter your mental state and your experience of reality. So, your nervous system is the basis of your experience, and chronic stress on the nervous system will generally lead to lack of cognitive performance and happiness. So, we're trying to not get into a state of stress without following it up by rest. And if you don't do this, you can have some symptoms of chronic stress, which include fatigue, inability to focus, lack of creativity, depression, and anxiety. And these are, of course, the opposite of what we're trying to achieve with our experience engineering. So, we have finally arrived at the nootropics that we will be exploring use of for de-stressing and relaxation. And how I found these is that I scouted selfhack.com and examine.com to get a quick overview of the compound that may have effects on the nervous system, so that the sympathetic nervous system, as opposed to the parasympathetic nervous system, gets deactivated. So essentially, the sympathetic nervous system slows down and the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system takes over, because the parasympathetic nervous system is the one which will help you relax, and it's not the one which will help you get into a state where you're super energized, which I am probably a bit too much right now, and should probably use some of these nootropics after I finish this podcast episode. But these nootropics are for de-stressing and relaxation, and I found them at selfhack.com and examine.com, and I think that you can use those two websites for the purpose of finding compounds and finding studies on them if you want to dig deeper, which I think you should do if you are going to use any compounds. You can find studies and dig deeper into the nitty-gritty of the effects of the compounds, which I think is very important for using safely and for the most benefits. So, the 4 nootropics that I've chosen for de-stressing and relaxation are Schisandra, then we have L-theanine, we have ashwagandha, we have rhodiola rosea, and that's it. So, I'm going to be covering my use, and I'm also going to be covering the science of these 4 nootropics. So, starting off with Schisandra, the science of Schisandra is that it can be useful to preserve proper cognitive function under exposure to stress, because it is an adaptogen, and adaptogens, well, the definition of an adaptogen is that they help you adapt to stress. So, to illustrate how effective Schisandra is for preservation of cognitive function, we can look to the study which was made on rats who were given the memory formation blocking drug scopolamine. And when they were also given Schisandra with this memory blocking drug, they had the ability to form new memories still. They didn't lose that ability. So, studying the effects of a compound on memory preservation under the effects of scopolamine is believed to give high insight into the capacity of the studied compound to preserve memory in humans under conditions that would otherwise lead to cognitive impairment, such as sleep deprivation or chronic stress. So, this is important because chronic stress can impair cognitive function. So can the memory blocking drug scopolamine. Both the condition of scopolamine and chronic stress can induce cognitive impairment and block memory formation. And Schisandra helped preserve the ability of the rats to form new memories, which is why Schisandra is a very useful way of helping yourself in situations where you're thinking you are having suboptimal levels of stress. And after strenuous exercise, it was found that cortisol, which is essentially the stress hormone, which is a bit vaguely defined, but we'll get into depth about that in future articles and podcast episodes. But this hormone in the body, after strenuous exercise, the levels were lower in rats that had taken Schisandra than in rats that hadn't taken anything. And this means that if you use Schisandra, then if you're also exposing yourself to strenuous exercise, so that means hard exercise, then you can probably expect to be slightly more relaxed afterwards if you use Schisandra. And that's something which is I can highly attest to that, and I highly recommend using Schisandra for relaxation because it is, in my experience, the perfect parasympathetic nervous system activator. It gets you more relaxed and it lowers the stress hormone, as was found in this study on rats. And my assessment is that Schisandra has no risk for addiction and that there is only a low risk for side effects. Now, my use is 500 milligrams to 5 grams every now and then if I am stressed. I'll probably be using it after this podcast episode because I've had a lot of stuff to do today, and I'm going to try to get into a deep state of relaxation after I've recorded this podcast episode so that I can maybe upload it, maybe do some light work instead of continually pushing the button of high level cognitive function, so that I can really just level out the long-term effects of this stress that I have put on myself today. I've been doing strenuous exercise and I've been doing other hard cognitive work, which is why I want to have a rest period afterwards so that I can recover and get stronger afterwards. But getting back to Schisandra. Schisandra works very well for me, as I've said, and it slightly enhances my mood, and it's great for mitigating anxiousness and stress, especially when it's induced by caffeine or other stimulating nootropics. If I take too much, which is around 6+ grams, then I can become drowsy and lose my edge or motivation. And that's it for Schisandra, really. So let's move on to L-theanine. And L-theanine can prevent spikes in blood pressure and the magnitude of stress responses. And there's a high level of evidence for L-theanine improving relaxation, and some evidence for it reducing anxiety as well as improving attention and sleep quality. And this is all based on scientific studies. And my assessment is that L-theanine has no risk for addiction and that there is only a low risk for side effects. And this assessment is something that I base on the science as I understand it. And that is the case for all of these nootropics that I mentioned when I do assessments of the risk for addiction and the risk for side effects. So don't take it for a fact, take it for what it is, my assessment. I try to understand this and understand the science as good as I can, as well as I can. But of course, the brain, as we know, is not a very good tool for modeling the world. Of course, it's the best tool in a sense that we have, but it's full of biases and it's highly inaccurate at times. So don't take my assessment for a fact. Moving on to my use of L-theanine, I use 50 to 400 milligrams of L-theanine on occasion for reducing stress and increasing relaxation. And I think that works well. Especially if you combine it with caffeine, it's a great method for getting into calm but focused and alert state of mind. So if you combine the two, which is probably the most used nootropic stack ever, those two combined, then you'll get into a focused and alert state of mind. I think. I do that. I get into a calm and focused and alert state of mind. And I know that a lot of other people get into such a state of mind too. Probably go around 200 milligrams of caffeine and 300 milligrams of L-theanine, or 200 milligrams of L-theanine and 100 milligrams of caffeine, depending on your tolerance and stimulant tolerance in general, I'd say. And the biggest problem that many people have from using L-theanine is drowsiness. So if you find through self-experimentation that this is not a problem for you, then I think that you should settle for the smallest dose with the desired effects. You'll not build a tolerance to L-theanine, so if you find a way of using it for reducing stress, you can continue to use it forever unless you start noticing side effects. And that's it for L-theanine. So let's move on to ashwagandha. So the science of ashwagandha is that it quite reliably reduces anxiety and stress, and it's a herb. It's also an adaptogenic herb, so it helps you control stress, helps you adapt to stress. And the mechanism by which ashwagandha works is probably mainly by lowering cortisol in the human central nervous system. And I'm backing this claim up by a quotation from a scientific study where 300 milligrams of an ashwagandha extract, which was full spectrum for 60 days in persons with chronic mental stress, was able to improve all tested parameters and reduced serum cortisol by 27.9%. So given ashwagandha, 300 milligrams, that's not a very high dose even, for 60 days to these persons with chronic mental stress, improved all tested parameters. Let me actually go into that study because I don't remember it currently, which this is one of the sort of things that I think can be biohacked to improve upon. Why shouldn't I be able to remember? I've read this study before. Why shouldn't I be able to remember what is said in this study in regards to which measurements they've done on cognitive abilities? I think I should be able to remember that, and I'm probably not in perfect state for memory recall as I'm a bit stressed right now in comparison with how I usually am. But in the study which I have in front of me here, they were making the T-test and the Mann-Whitney test. So let me just Google that for a second. T-test. Bam. Okay, so that's on the topic of statistics, statistical analysis, and that is the case for Mann-Whitney test too. Bam, bam, bam. Concentration. Oh, so the metric that they used was self-assessed quality of life. And one would expect, of course, that if you could reduce serum cortisol by 27.9% in people who have chronic mental stress, then you'd probably get an increase in well-being. And in my personal experience, that has been the case too, that the decrease in cortisol, of course, I can say with certainty that I've experienced a decrease of cortisol. You can't really have that level of self-insights, but I can suspect that my levels of cortisol have decreased when I've used ashwagandha, because they have the extracts that I've used have given me a state of relaxation, which has also increased my well-being. And to finish off the science part of this ashwagandha bit here, we have the fact that my assessment is that ashwagandha has no risk for addiction, and I also think that there is only a low risk for side effects. My use of ashwagandha, further continuing, is 0.75 milliliters of ashwagandha tincture every day before I go to bed. And I think that this really helps my sleep quality. And the reason I think this is, one, because I sleep essentially perfectly every single day. I have 1.5 hours plus of deep sleep and a 1.5 hours plus of REM sleep. And I didn't used to have these numbers a couple of months ago. But since I started tracking my sleep with the Oura Ring, I've also started experimenting with different methods of increasing my numbers for deep sleep and REM sleep, which help you both recuperate physically, which is mainly what happens when you sleep in deep sleep, and mentally, or rather, your intelligence regarding concepts and semantics and how things relate to each other, and your learning is consolidated into your memory when you are dreaming, which is your REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. So I, through self-experimentation and tracking through the Oura Ring, which is a ring which measures your heart rate variability and pulse when you sleep, among other things, I think, through those methods of experimenting with ashwagandha, I think that it has helped me improve my quality of sleep, which is what I mainly use it for. But when I use it during the day, I think that it does help me with my well-being and my levels of stress to reduce them. And if I take a high dose of ashwagandha, I feel very relaxed, but I do not lose any cognitive functions, except for the slightly lessened alertness that the relaxation results in. So I can still think, I can still write, I can still socialize, I can still meditate at peak levels when I have used ashwagandha. But I wouldn't recommend it necessarily for doing deep work, as it does slightly lessen your alertness and your energy and motivation. In smaller doses, I think it can increase your motivation because you're feeling more well, and fatigue and lack of energy and motivation is really the antithesis of well-being. So improving well-being will also help you feel more motivated, at least in my experience. They're very connected in my experience. So, moving on to the next one, rhodiola rosea. The science of rhodiola rosea is that it reduces fatigue and depression while increasing cognition and subjective well-being. It is also neuroprotective and improves the function of the immune system. And in regards to stress, and specifically life stress symptoms, which is what they have studied in the study that I have a quotation from, rhodiola extract at a dose of 200 milligram twice daily for 4 weeks is safe and effective in improving life stress symptoms to a clinically relevant degree. And my assessment of the science is that rhodiola rosea has no risk for addiction and that there's only a low risk for side effects. My use of rhodiola rosea is 175 to 400 milligrams every now and then in the morning if I want to amp up my cognition during the day to come. So that's essentially if I want to think a lot about what I am experiencing. So if I take rhodiola in the morning, then especially during the evening, I will be thinking a lot more about what I'm doing. I'll actually be thinking more, having more thoughts on the things that I'm putting inside of my consciousness, the things that I am experiencing. So, if I want to amp up my cognition during the day, then I use rhodiola in the morning. And I experience slightly lower levels of relaxation, but almost never stress when I have taken rhodiola rosea. I'm never mentally or physically fatigued at all during days when using rhodiola. And it's a great nootropic for me, really, because it even raises my mood a bit. And there's some variation between people as to how well rhodiola rosea works, which is true for all adaptogens, essentially. But I think that this is one of the ones of the adaptogens that will probably work for most people. I definitely think that you should try this one out as one of the first nootropics if you are new to nootropics. But I expect not all users will experience the constant high level of energy that I feel when taking it. And I think that you should also note that there are many nootropics that can help you with de-stressing and relaxing, and I've only chosen the ones with low risk profile. But they can still have a significant positive impact on your life, I think. And as I said earlier in the introduction of this covering of this blog post, mindfulness is crucial for de-stressing and relaxing. And I've written a couple of other articles on mindfulness, which I highly recommend you look into after this if you want to further understand how to engineer your experience. And they are the titles, that is, You're Non-Existent and God, Why Mindfulness is Helpful. And in this article, I really cover the philosophy of why mindfulness is, one, true, why it is really given you more of an objective, both more of an objective and subjective lens of reality at the same time, in a sense, because you're getting more of a lucid view of the world, because you're not constantly inside of your ego and reacting to everything that is happening. You can cease doing and acting for a slight while and start actually being in the present moment. That is the very short summarized version of that article. And the second article on mindfulness is how to practice mindfulness. And in this article, I cover 3 steps to consistently practice mindfulness the right way. And to know which 3 steps are the ones that you need for mindfulness practice, I think that you should read that article. And those articles could be found over at neutralize.com or the Medium blog, which has the username of David Ronlead. And that's pretty much it, my friends. I hope that you will put some of this into practice today and maybe buy some rhodiola rosea or Shisandra. But of course, do your own research first, though. And I'll be back soon on this podcast. So enjoy life and think well until I see you next time. Bye.